take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So thank you very much for coming to my talk. Thank you very much for Alexei for inviting me as well. Yeah, so today I'm going to be talking about building models with machine learning. So most of our research in my group is more based on optimization and control and applications of machine learning. But this talk is more going to be about modeling and about how we try to use machine learning to try to automate the building of models. This is just my research group. We have some of the areas that we work on, and I'm going to talk a bit about design of experiments and hybrid modeling today. OK, so I've structured the talk in two separate parts. So in one of them, we're going to be seeing if we can automate building models from first principles, right? So automating first principles model building. This is this one, automated discovery of kinetic models. And then the second part of the talk, I'm going to use some very similar techniques that I will present in the first part. But then I'm going to talk about hybrid modeling and how to try to automate the process of building them a bit. OK, so this work is done by Miguel, who's a first-year PhD student on my group, and in collaboration with Mimi, Klaus, and Dungda from Imperial and Kim and Manchester. OK. So, the typical first slide of motivation, which is what are kinetic models, right? And why are they important? I think people here don't need an introduction to what are kinetic models and why are they important. Well, they allow us to do many things, right? Everything from trying to scale up our processes, to try to optimize them, to try to understand them, right? So there's a few different reasons. But so I'm centering around the fact that kinetic models are important, and particularly first principles kinetic models, right? Things that can actually tell you something about your system. So, digital twinning is, the fancy name, but basically, how do we build models? Well, in the past, is, scientists alone building and maintaining the models, right? That's how we used to do it. That's how we do it. Today is a bit of human-machine interaction, right? Where a human writes some idea of the models, then they pass it to a computer, you do some parameter estimation, you try to assess it in several ways, right, and go back. And what will happen in the future, we don't know exactly when, but I'm sure in some future, is that algorithms will design and maintain our models, right? This is, again, in the form of digital twins now that we're seeing, right, where you want to have basically a digital representation of something that you have in real. And those are basically models, but with some extra features. And I'm going to try to focus on some first steps, right, into going to this direction, into trying to build models automatically. OK, so everyone knows about the typical or modeling paradigms, right, which is white box models, which is first principles. They don't have to be first principles, but let's say first principle, which means that you have knowledge from biology, chemistry, physics, right, into your models. Then you have the typical black box models, which are more like neural networks, Gaussian processes. There's a lot of research to try to make them interpretable, but basically they're black box models, right? And then there's gray box, which are more like hybrid models or parts which we can understand very well and parts which we cannot. Right? And today we're going to be focusing on white box models on this first part of the talk, and particularly again on how can we try to design them automatically, right? OK. So first, there's different ways to try to build models, right? And I know actually the group here with Alexei, you worked quite a bit on some of these topics, right? So one very typical approach is symbolic regression, right? And there's there's many ways to do symbolic regression, but you can think about it in two big families. One of them is using mixed integer programming strategies, right? But for these things, you have to basically already define your model, and obviously it has its advantages, right? But we would like something a bit more flexible than this, and it has some combinatorial explosion of combinations. Now the other way to do this is things like evolutionary strategies, right? Where you try to evolve your models to try to represent some kind of objective function, which is maybe some loss function, right? Some data and so on. And we're going to be focusing on this. So this is what we've decided to go for. So we've tried a bit of both, but this is definitely the method that we're going for. More using evolutionary strategies to try to create models, right? OK. So again, many people have worked on this, right? So what are we doing different? And you'll see that we're not doing anything particularly different than what other people are doing. Or we're not doing anything that has not been done outside in other things. But we're trying to combine a few building blocks into a methodology that we've seen that works quite well. And this methodology includes genetic programming, right? Which is, again, it's the evolutionary algorithms, right, that you try to create different models. We want to, depending on what you're trying to solve, but here we're trying to predict kinetic models, right? Particularly in chemistry. And then we just call it chemistry informed, right? Where we say, okay, we don't really have reactions of higher than third order, right? So we're going to cap our polynomials to third order. You don't see sines, cosines, logarithms, right, in rate expressions. So we restrict our search space to what we know. And this is a bit like the approach of the MIP, right, the mixed index programming, where you do have to decide what building blocks you use. So we do decide a priori what kind of building blocks we can do, but we don't decide how they can mix, right? This is just done by symbolic regression. And something else that I think it's quite important is when you compare models, right? You have some data that you're trying to fit, and you want to do a correct parameter estimation. And I think this is something that we sometimes overlook, right? So to compare apples and apples, you have to have two models which are very well estimated with their parameters, right? So we have quite a routine for estimating parameters, which includes like an evolutionary algorithm, right? Initially, which searches, more or less explores the host space. And then it does some kind of quasi-Newton method, BFGS, to find the solution, right, at the end. It's not global, right? We're not claiming that this is global, but in practice, it works pretty well, and you will find the optimum. And you also want to do this very fast, right? Because symbolic regression, basically the way it works, is that you need to create different models, and you need to estimate their parameters, right? And you need to estimate the parameters very fast, but also reliably, right? Again, so that you're comparing different models well estimated. And finally, we're not using the typical likelihood function, right? So a least squares is a likelihood function. The problem with the typical least squares, which you can find it here, is that you overfit, right? And when we're comparing two models, we don't want to, we need something so that we don't just get very, very complex models, right? You can imagine like neural networks or models with thousands of parameters. And obviously, they will fit better, right? Because they have more parameters, more degrees of freedom. So what we're doing is something called information criteria, which is basically a combination, and just simply explained, you have a least squares, but you also penalize for having a number of parameters, right? And basically what you're saying is for every extra parameter that you have, you need to give me like some amount of a better fit, right? So every parameter has to serve a purpose. If you're getting the point of diminishing returns, then it's not worth it. Now the problem is, how do you decide these values, right? So there's things like Cindy and so on that just ramp up the value until you're happy. So instead of that, we go for this information criteria, which make some statistical assumptions, right? But they are statistically informed, let's say. So there's many information criteria. Different kinds make different assumptions, and all of them are more or less are similar. But this is an important part that we are still trying to research. What we did for now is because different information criteria will work differently or better or worse for different systems or problems that you have. So what we did is we said, okay, let's try a lot of our problems first, screen them, see which information criteria work better, and we went for AIC, right, which is the main criteria that we've done here. We've thought about doing things like voting, right? There's some nice properties, some statistical properties about voting that you can do, but we haven't gotten there yet. But anyway, so these are basically the building blocks of what we're doing, and basically this is our first methodology, which Miguel called it automated knowledge discovery of kinetic models using a weak formulation of symbolic regression, ADOC-W for short. Weak formulation because I'm going to present a second algorithm, which is a strong formulation, which is about how you estimate derivatives. But I won't talk too much about it. But the basic idea is, again, the building blocks that I described. You have a genetic programming algorithm, right, that gives you different combinations of models. Each model, we estimate their parameters, right? Again, we try to do this quite reliably. And then we compare them through this model selection strategy. We have data, right, for this. So what this means is we do a loop, right, over here. And after this, we spat out, basically, some number. It depends on how close they are and so on. But some number of the best performing algorithms, right, which are basically saying the statistically most probable algorithms, right? Obviously, just as a small intersection here, you also want to build first principles models because they can extrapolate, right? I mean, that's why you want to do it. And this allows you to have some extrapolation properties, right? Again, because you're not overfitting, so that allows bit extrapolation. Anyway, so the idea is that this would be our procedure. But then, this alone will not solve your problems. And what we do instead is do the typical experimental design, right? Again, this is something that many people have worked on. It's not new, but its combination of the whole procedure is new, in the sense that, so we have here the most probable models. And then we do the typical design of experiments where we maximize the difference between these two models, right? And try to design an experiment that will maximize the difference, and then it allows to evaluate which one is the true model. Yep. So we do an experiment, we incorporate this data into our original data set, and we go through the whole procedure again. Yep. The idea is that you do this until you have one model alone, right? And this is your best model. Go ahead and try it out. Now, this is very computationally costly, right? Particularly this part over here, the generating different models and trying to estimate the parameters. So it worked for some small systems, but obviously if you want to scale, it's going to be a problem. So instead of that, we have the algorithm, what we call the strong formulation, which that means that we're going to estimate derivatives separately. And then, because this over here is a dynamic parameter estimation problem, right? Because kinetic models are dynamic. So basically, you're doing a dynamic parameter estimation problem. Here, we're trying to avoid that so that we can be faster at creating our models. So the idea is that we have, let's say, our experimental data here. We fit this experimental data with some polynomials, right? Here, we're not interested in knowing, in getting any we just want to fit a polynomial. And we use the same techniques of the information criteria to know which polynomial to do, right? So that you can capture the trends well. Then, from this fit, then we actually can get our derivatives, right? And this is the derivatives that we have. And so we can find our kinetics models by directly fitting these trends, right? So directly fitting the derivatives, that way we get around the fact that now we don't have a dynamic optimization, dynamic parameter estimation problem. So anyway, we have the same building blocks, right? But now we do it twice. We do it once for this and once for this. But this one is very, very fast, right? And this one is also much faster, right? So actually, you substitute one big problem by two much, much simpler problems. And again, the same. At the end, we do still, are we satisfied or not? Do we have one most likely model or not? And then we go back. And we try to discriminate between the competing models, right? And create an experiment and go back. OK, so case studies. So we have 3 different case studies, right, to try it out. If you see, this one is very, very simple. This one is still simple. And this one is a bit not that simple. But we still haven't scaled this, right, to very, very large problems. And that's something that we really want to do. And like everything, it works well for the cases that we've tried. And it actually spits out good results. But it's not there yet where you can actually give it to someone and it could get a very, very complex expression. But so the idea is that we did for these 3 case studies. Again, it worked very well. So here we have 2 numbers. One is for the weak formulation. The other is for the strong formulation. And we do only 1 experiment extra, 2 experiments extra, 1, 2, and 2. And here it directly spat out the best model. And in all the cases, we got the correct model, right, which was very interesting. Because obviously, you don't know what the correct model is in reality, right? So the stopping criteria is here is one model that is clearly better than all the others. It's the most plausible, statistically plausible model, so that's the one that you have to go for. Oh, I should mention, we all this, obviously at the beginning when you're trying a new methodology, we first tried in an in silico case study, right? So we did this with computational. It's all computational, right? Now we're working with Mimi and Klaus so that we can actually validate these things in the lab. Okay. Yeah, so that's the first part of the first method that I wanted to talk today. Again, this is an idea, is that it's a way to try to create first principles models in an automated fashion, right? And there's two things here. So one, again, it works very well. It would work for other systems, right? We still need to make it work better so it can scale to larger problems. The second thing is that we're not doing anything novel on its own, right? Simply what we're doing is grabbing different building blocks for even different communities and putting them together into a methodology that works. So if people are interested, we have a preprint out, and it's probably going to get updated. And here we explain the work in more detail. OK. Quickly, the second part of the talk is going to be about hybrid modeling, right? And we're going to use a few of the other techniques here. And the idea, again, is to try to create hybrid models automatically, right? This work is done by Hai-Ting Wang, one of my students, and in collaboration with Cleo Contorabdi from Imperial. And what's the idea here? Well, we all know that hybrid models is a way where you can combine. There's different types of hybrid models, but here I'm assuming that you want to combine first principles with data-driven models. Now, we all like first principles models, right, when we can do them, because they can extrapolate, right, as long as your physical, chemical assumptions that you made are still valid. Yeah. But you cannot model unknown phenomena, right? That's just something that we can't do. And sometimes you cannot, you will not be, even if you know the phenomena, right? So some quantum interactions, even if we know them, they're intractable or very hard to optimize or other things, right? They're just very expensive. Data-driven models, on the other hand, they cannot extrapolate, right? So that's well known. And you have where you have very, very large data and so on. Then you have this double descent where yes, you can extrapolate, but in engineering we're not in that domain, right? And so instead, can we then use data-driven models and combine them with first principles so that we can model these things that are either hard to model or that we don't know using data, but that we still retain the extrapolation, right, that we want to have, or that it still retains the information that we want from the first principles. Yeah, so the problem is, so the worst thing that you want to have is that you build a hybrid model, and that then you have a huge neural network there, right? And you might as well have just a huge neural network from the beginning, right? Because you will overfit your model, you will not be able to optimize, and so on. So you can imagine that we applied a very similar approach as the one before, right? So the idea is that we use the information criteria to tell us, if you're talking about neural networks, for example, OK, how many nodes or how many layers, right, can I do, and can I still get a good fit, right? And if adding an extra neuron, maybe just the extra better fit that I get is not so much substantial, right? So again, you're penalizing the number of parameters here, which is in the end the number of neurons and layers and so on. OK, so again, how does this work? Well, initially you want to define your mechanistic backbone, right? That's always what you want to do when you're dealing with first principle models. Then you want to choose, OK, what parts of my model I want to change, right, and put in a data-driven approach. One thing that I should mention is that this, so I put this figure here just as an example, but generally you don't want to do something like this, right? This is just basically, here you would capture basically the error that this model is not fitting, but it's not really interpretable, right? What you generally want to do is replace parts of your model that you don't know, right, specific parts, with some kind of data-driven component. OK. Yeah, there's places where you want to do it, maybe in optimization and so on, but not in general. So then what we do is we do a very similar procedure from what I mentioned from Miguel's part, where we have some kind of either, and here we've played around with mixed integer programming and with genetic programming as well. But the space is much smaller, right? Because here, basically, if you're dealing with polynomials, you're dealing with some number of polynomials. Or if you're dealing with neural networks, you don't have that many nodes and layers that you can play around with anyway. But it's basically the same procedure where we generate different configurations, we assess them, and we get the most plausible model. And then, again, we do a design of experiments, right? And this part, again, this is something that has been studied many, many times, right? And many people know about this. But it's very important that when you're trying to build models and either first principles or this kind of hybrid and comparing models, you do want to have an extra excitation of your system, right? To really see which one is your best model. And we just do a design of experiment. So just an example that we're trying it out is with biofuels, right? Again, I'm not going to go too many details about this, but it's about biofuels. So trying to have microalgae to produce, well, biofuels and bioproducts, and now some pharmaceuticals actually. And this is the work with Clio, where her expertise come into place. So we did we've done this on several systems, but just one simple example. Assume that you have this biochemical model, right? Now, you have some parameters, mu0 and μm. And basically, this is the whole expression if you wanted to replace that with a physics, a sort of physics/biology inspired model, right? And again, we're doing the same as before. When we're developing a new methodology, firstly, we don't want to go directly to the lab, right? We're doing first a computational benchmarking, and later we are moving to soon do this in the lab with bioprocess. But okay, so these terms basically are this whole expression. And what we want to see is, okay, can we try this methodology where we try this same model, which is this one over here, but now we simply try to model this via some neural network in there, right? And the key here is that, I mean, these parameters, generally, right, you treat them as a single number, right, or as functions like you want to have here. But in general, they represent these metabolic pathways, right? And again, this is what I'm saying, where one, many times we don't really understand them, and two, even if we did understand them, modeling them and combining them is very, very hard. Yep. Anyway, so this is the case study. So again, you first build the backbone of your model, right? So you need to know what you're doing, and here's where chemistry and biological and physics information comes into place. You look at your unknown models, and then you see which ones you wanna change. And then what we did, again, is simply we grabbed these expressions, and then we replaced them with a polynomial and a neural network model, right? Here, I mean, neural network just because it's a typical thing that people think about. And we tried also a polynomial to say, OK, we're going to try something a bit simpler, right, and seeing how it works. And again, this is here we have binary variables which decide which terms turn on and off. And this is what you want to pass to your MILP solver. Yeah, so we follow this procedure, and this is a bit of a busy slide. So this is the same that I had before. Here there's two plots. One is for the hybrid polynomial. The other is for the hybrid neural network. For example, here you can see that these two models seem to be the most plausible, right? And these are the two models that then we do a design of experiments, right? With the neural networks, this is now the number of nodes. So we had a single hidden layer. We have a very small model. So we have a single hidden layer. One is 3 nodes. The other is 4 nodes. And again, we want to distinguish, right? The plot here, this is a loss, right? You can see that the negative log likelihood, which is this one over here, which that's basically your least squares, that's always going down, right? Monotonically with the number of parameters that you have, right? And this is obvious, right? The more parameters that you have, the more degrees of freedom, you'll get a better fit. Otherwise, you're doing something wrong. And again, then we do a model discrimination step, and then we find the most plausible model. What we did is we said, again, we're doing this computationally, right? We always want to do things first in a computer before we actually go and to our collaborators in the lab and tell them to try out our things. So we did this with noise as well, right? And we have a bit of an analysis of how much, because any method will break with noise, right? That's something that we know, and we all know. So we want to see how much time or how much noise it takes to break. And the main thing here is that we got up to 20% noise, and we were quite robust. So you can see that, actually probably you can't see, and that's a good thing. We have dotted lines and we have solid lines. The dotted line is the real system, and the solid lines are our hybrid models, and basically they go very well. And the bounds here are we did this as if we did our experiment several times and we generated data, because your data is a random variable itself, right? So you want to see, okay, if we create this many times, what's the bound or how uncertain we are. And that's what we got. OK, so again, in summary, what we're trying to present here is a methodology where it can allow you to combine first principles, right, and machine learning models in a way that it makes sense, right? Again, you don't want to have a huge neural network impeded there by some mechanistic model and then say that that's a hybrid model. And we did this, again, we divided this methodology, which was based on a lot of things that we talked in the first one, which is, again, using a few building blocks, right? So again, we didn't do anything terribly novel here, right? But what we did is just ensemble a few things into a methodology that makes sense and creates good results. And that's it. Thank you.